Alright, sit down for a second. I want to tell you about one moment on a battlefield in Ukraine that almost nobody noticed. It's night. A drone pilot is hunched over a screen in a dugout, watching grainy video from something flying miles away. On that screen, a shape. A Russian vehicle sitting where it shouldn't be. He draws a box around it and locks on. Then the picture stutters, freezes, tears itself into static. And across the top of the screen, two words. Signal lost. Normally that's where the story ends. No link, no pilot, no strike. The drone just wanders off and falls out of the sky. But that night it didn't fall. It kept flying, straight toward the thing the pilot had pointed at a few seconds earlier. Because it already knew. The target was locked into its camera and its software. The human had already done his part. Unsettling, right? I felt something cold when I first read it. But that's not the part that actually kept me awake. The frightening thing isn't that a machine finished the job. It's what that machine costs and what it used to cost. Because if something cheap can do part of what a cruise missile does, then something very old just quietly cracked open. So before we go further, let me ask you something. Who is allowed to kill? And who decided that in the first place? Let's back up. In August 2026, Business Insider ran a piece about how Ukraine's drones behave when Russia severs the link. Their source was a former drone operator, Dmytro Zhluktenko, now an analyst with Ukraine's 413th Unmanned Systems Regiment, call sign RAID. He described something operators simply call target lock. The pilot chooses the target. The drone keeps tracking it even after he's gone. And that's routine over there, not rare. Russia jams everything. Command links, video feeds, GPS. That front line is a swamp, and drones drown. Some strike drones talk to their pilots through a Starlink terminal bolted on top. Dive hard, turn hard, and the antenna loses the satellite. So, Ukrainian engineers asked a very practical question. If the human is going to vanish anyway, what can the machine finish on its own? Their answer was the last few seconds. Not the decision to kill, just the flying, the tracking, the final correction before impact. Ukraine's defense ministry showed off an interceptor called Lit Avar from a company named F-Drones. Its headline feature sounds like a software update. Last mile, pixel lock. The drone identifies the target on its own and guides itself all the way down to impact. The ministry's own wording is almost casual. In that terminal phase, the pilot controls only speed. Everything else is performed automatically. Another company, the Fourth Law, sells a guidance module you bolt onto existing drones. Machine vision grabs whatever target the operator picked. And in June, Ukraine announced a system automating 95% of an interception. The operator picks a Shahed, gives the order, AI finishes. Careful now, because this is where people exaggerate. Ukraine is not fighting killer robots. A human still picks, still decides, still cancels. The machine only takes the part where hesitation means failure. The seconds when the target moves and the signal dies, that's all. But that's all is doing a lot of work in that sentence, isn't it? Hold on to it. We're coming back to it. Here's the question that started nagging at me. A human picks the target. A machine flies to it and hits it alone. That is not a new idea at all. That is, almost word for word, the description of a cruise missile. For decades, a Tomahawk receives its target before launch. Then it flies itself, low and fast along an evasive route, and strikes what it was given. So what actually separates that from a drone finishing its attack alone? The wings, the warhead, or just the word we use? Let's be fair about the differences. A Tomahawk flies over 1,000 miles, carries a huge warhead, and has been fired thousands of times. But I think the comparison everyone reaches for is the wrong one. Nobody is replacing a Tomahawk with something from a garage. The real question is narrower and much scarier. How much of a cruise missile's job can become cheap enough to be disposable? Fly far, hit precisely, keep going with nobody steering. Those three things used to arrive bundled inside one extremely expensive object. Now they're coming apart. Each capability is unbundling, getting cheaper, and showing up inside machines nobody would ever call a missile. Ukraine's Firepoint builds a long-range attack drone, the FP-1, which reporting says can travel up to 1,600 kilometers. Public estimates put its unit price around $55,000. Remember that number. We're about to set it beside another one. The U.S. Navy's own page lists the newest Tomahawk, Block 5, at roughly $3.64 million each. Read those two again. Same basic idea. Reach far, hit precisely. Different by something like a factor of 65. Feel that gap? So no, the drone hasn't become a Tomahawk. It's more like part of the Tomahawk's power slid downhill into much cheaper hands. Now I want to shift the question slightly. Most arguments about AI weapons start somewhere moral, and I understand exactly why. Should a machine be permitted to kill a human being? That matters. But I don't think it's the biggest thing happening here. The bigger question is boring. Nobody makes movies about it. What does advanced violence cost per unit? For centuries, more than you could afford. You want to hit something 1,000 miles away? You needed an air force, satellites, engineers, factories, a treasury? You needed a state. Now look at what a precision drone is made of. A commercial camera, a flight controller, a small computer, batteries, open source vision software. A Ukrainian defense founder put it flatly, automating that final target acquisition is, in engineering terms, one of the easier problems. Developers combine a free open-source vision library with a learning model, and a cheap camera learns to hold onto a moving shape. I'm not going to walk you through how. That's not what this is for. But you already understand what ordinary parts imply. Once the parts are ordinary, the cost curve flips over. The expensive thing stops being the attack. It becomes the defense. Look at the Red Sea. Between late 2023 and mid-2024, over 130 attacks hit merchant ships and warships there. Experts estimated many of those one-way attack drones at around $2,000. The larger Shahed 136 at roughly $20,000. And what shoots them down? A destroyer's SM-2 interceptor. The latest variant costs about $2.1 million. Per shot. One Pentagon official summarized it in a single flat sentence. The cost offset, he said, is not on our side. And that's before insurance premiums. Before shipping giants rerouted around Africa instead of a canal carrying 12% of world trade. Nobody had to sink a warship. They only had to make protecting the sea more expensive than sailing all the way around it. And that's the sentence I keep circling. The state's monopoly on violence was a moral idea. It was also, quietly, a price tag. 400 years ago, Thomas Hobbes watched a civil war and described life without a state as a war of everyone against everyone. His answer was the Leviathan. Hand your sword to one enormous authority, and in exchange, you finally get to sleep through the night. 3 centuries later, Max Weber wrote the definition still repeated in classrooms. A community successfully claiming the monopoly of legitimate physical force within a territory. Look at that word again. Successfully. Weber wasn't describing a right handed down from heaven. He was describing a claim that happens to work. Just war theory rests on the same floor. Philosophers call it legitimate authority. The idea that not just anyone may wage war. Traditionally, states held war rights that militias, warlords, and rebel movements simply did not. International law still leans heavily in that direction. So the state took the monopoly. But ask yourself honestly, what actually held that monopoly in place all those years? Was it ethics? Partly, but also armies, borders, taxes, arsenals, factories, customs officers, and the crushing expense of anything that flies far and hits hard. 5 locks on the same door. Philosophy, law, administration, production, and price. Only one of those 5 was ever made of money. Nobody ever wrote a treaty saying warlords can't own cruise missiles. Nobody needed to. Warlords couldn't afford them. That was the treaty. So the philosophy was never wrong. What's shifting is the material world that made the philosophy work. Does that distinction land for you? Because the money lock is the one slipping. And when one lock slips, you find out what the other 4 were really worth. Careful again, because this is where the conversation usually goes stupid. Nobody is handing terrorists Tomahawks. That is not the scenario. The real risk is quieter than that. It's that they may not need one anymore to produce a slice of the same effect. The UN's Counterterrorism Office studied this with conflict armament research. They're finding armed groups mostly get drones from ordinary commercial markets, mostly not stolen military stock. It's purchases, smuggling, and increasingly assembling their own from components nobody thinks twice about selling online. Islamic State ran an entire drone program in Iraq and Syria. Researchers estimate their explosive carrying drones cost $600 to $1,000. And Yemen shows the escalator. 2015, a stolen camera drone used for scouting. 2016, crewed attack drones, range around 150 kilometers. By 2018, versions reportedly reaching 1,500 kilometers. By 2021, the targets were ports, tankers, energy infrastructure. Not soldiers, economies. Now picture that escalator with terminal guidance bolted on. Not better politics, not bigger warheads, just cheaper accuracy spreading outward year after year. The old pirate had to board your ship. The old warlord had to hold your town. The new version needs a launch point and patience. And the goal shifts from destroy to something more corrosive. Disrupt. A closed airport? A refinery down a week? Unprofitable insurance rates? That's the shape of it. The weaker side doesn't have to win. It only has to make order expensive for whoever's maintaining it. So where does that leave the philosophy? My answer is that it doesn't vanish. It just arrives late in certain places on the map. Where states are strong, the rules still bite. Export controls, weapons reviews, courts, sanctions, procurement law, somebody's actual name on a document. The Red Cross has spent a decade pushing for binding limits on weapons that select and apply force without any human intervention. Their core worry isn't robots turning evil. It's simpler and worse that nobody, including the person who launched it, can predict the result. And on arms control, there's a gap you could drive a truck through. There is still no dedicated binding treaty governing armed drones. Meanwhile, the technology sprints. Ukraine's defense AI chief told Reuters he expects warfare to become a contest between operating systems within years. And where the state is thin, civil wars, smuggling corridors, coastlines nobody patrols, the rule isn't written by philosophy, it's written by access. For centuries, we tried to lock violence inside the state. Never perfectly, but well enough to build laws and treaties and moral theories on top. The modern state asked one question: who has the right to kill? The new battlefield asks a colder one: who can afford the parts? I don't have a tidy ending for you. Only that question, and a price that keeps falling while we argue. So, what do you think? That's a wrap for today. Keep an eye on the price tags, not just the headlines. I'll see you in the next one.